Hello, I'm Colleen Gallagher, CEO at Onward and Upward, and you're listening to the Association Insights podcast, where each week we interview association leaders from across the country to hear how they're trying new things, taking big risks, and delivering value for their members. We'll explore the realities of what it means to work in and with associations and bring you the insights and inspiration you need to advance your career and make big changes at your association. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Association Insights podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Henning. Today we're talking about what happens when an entire industry faces a major shift and an association steps up not just to inform, but to lead. I'm joined by Lisa Townsend, Director of Marketing and Communications at the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, or ACRP. ACRP is the only nonprofit dedicated exclusively to supporting clinical research professionals worldwide, serving a global community focused on patient safety, data integrity, and the highest standards of clinical practice. ACRP earned a COM Impact Award for transforming a major global regulatory shift into a far-reaching education and communications campaign that empowered tens of thousands of clinical research professionals worldwide. It was truly an amazing accomplishment. Today, we'll unpack how Lisa and her team turned a complex regulatory moment into an ecosystem of content, learning, and engagement, and what other associations can learn when their industries face major change. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk about our campaign with you and your listeners.
Yeah, we are too. So to start, tell me about ACRP, about your mission and who you serve, and why being a trusted source is so critical in the clinical research ecosystem.
Yes. So the mission of ACRP is to promote excellence in clinical research across the globe. So we have more than 20,000 individual and organizational members who really look to us for gold standard training, certification, advocacy, and an engaged community. This year, we're excited to celebrate our 50th anniversary. So this is a moment for us to honor the impact of clinical research on human health, celebrate the profound impact of the workforce, and really inspire one another to continue to lead into the future.
That's great. So let's shift gears and talk about the campaign. So when the ICH announced the revisions to your E6, and hopefully you're going to tell our listeners a little bit more about that, what made your team realize this wasn't just another regulatory update, but a moment that needed a full communications and education strategy?
Sure. So, to give a little context, the International Council for Harmonization, that's ICH, and they set global standards. So that way, clinical research professionals around the world, receive training according to the highest standards of excellence, safety, and quality. And so it really does have the goal of supporting global collaboration in drug development. It's really important. And so, we took this opportunity, really seriously and just recognized it was a great opportunity. So ICH released their draft guidance in May of 2023. So this update was anticipated, and it was just a matter of time for the final guidelines to be released. We had several of our fellows and subject matter experts who provided our team with regular updates on the timeline and the anticipated content changes. So we were in the loop, which was really helpful for planning. And then we anticipated that the final guidelines would come out in January of 2025. So 6 months before that, our Chief Executive Officer, Susan Landis, gathered an internal staff group to really level set on the importance of the regulatory updates, why this matters for clinical research professionals, and what our role should be. Luckily, Susan has a background in communications and deep industry experience, so she understands the importance of, positioning our brand and communicating our value. And I think like a lot of your listeners would recognize, it's incredibly helpful to have those in leadership understand the importance of communications and how, bringing communications to this table at the start um, of the planning and not just being brought in later to execute on others' ideas makes a huge difference in your success and just how you communicate.
Yeah, I think coupled with the fact that you had some like a heads up, you had some time to figure this out, and then you're working sort of side by side with people who really understand communications. That definitely is a bonus. What went into that early planning, and why was being proactive so important for your members?
Yeah, so we met across departments and talked about, what could this look like for us? And so by being proactive and launching our communications in advance of the release, and really before other training organizations in clinical research, that was really critical for us. So, our first message was that ACRP is committed to being your trusted source for the most accurate and up to date information related to clinical research guidelines and regulations. Sounds like a mouthful, but this was clear messaging for our audience. And that's what we started with on social media, on our website, at the bottom of relevant emails, digital banners, all of it. And we still use it, 1 year later because it will always be true. And for us, trust, like being a trusted source, that was the key to our messaging. So, we clearly stated internally that it was critical for us as an organization that if we were going to make this promise externally, that we had to deliver. We could not make a mistake.
I mean, your approach was so collaborative, and I think that's probably, you know, a, a lot of your success. You have the ICH working group and focus groups and your subject matter experts. How did involving your members shape both the content itself and the credibility of the campaign?
Yes. So that collaboration was critical. As a membership association, partnering with our members on the creation and validation of content and really leaning on their expertise to provide member driven education is a top priority. And so, like many other associations, we are committed to producing content that's for our members and by our members. And to speak to the credibility piece, we also know that content which is shared by your members and key stakeholders, when they do that, they act as a bridge of trust and relatability. So, when they can connect and amplify your content to their networks, that greatly helps the organization amplify its reach and its impact. So, needless to say, they were critical from start to finish. And the other piece I would add is that I also leaned on our subject matter experts to help with the promotions. So I always let them know in advance when their content would be posted on social media so they could share it. I also set up a dedicated thread within our online members only community, and I asked them to cross promote their content there and really to create a dedicated place for conversation and asking questions. And that was solely member driven. Did not want to have staff, being involved in
Right,
that. Just to
right.
keep the integrity.
I mean, one of the things that stood out and continues to stand out when we reviewed your application was it wasn't like you just did one thing, right? People have had lots of different regulatory issues and they come out with a webinar or a blog series, but you didn't. You came out with tools and training, live sessions, resource hubs, social chapters, and more. How did you even think about the sequencing for all of that while avoiding, I feel like, overwhelming your members? When I looked at this, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like this is so much amazing content. You are having this urgency, but you didn't overwhelm your members. So I'm sure it was in the sequencing of doing this. So can you walk us through that?
Yes. So the order of the campaign's execution was really important for clarity, and as you said, to avoid confusion and overload. So we started communicating externally 3 months before the final guidelines. And I felt it was really important for us to have a singular place on our website for clinical researchers to access content, trainings, and updates. So I created a guidelines and regulations resource center. So this was our main hub. And in the beginning, we would post documents and resources from external sources like the FDA and HHS and international organizations like ICH. And so we just wanted to make it very fast and easy for our community to find the education and the information that they needed. So the launch of the Resource Center was the first deliverable that we promoted, along with our statement, our intention of being the trusted source. And so it was open to the public, and all the resources were free to download. And we had discussed putting it behind a member wall or using this opportunity as a way to encourage membership. But ultimately, we knew that it was more important to support the industry through education than make it a promotional tool for ACRP.
I think that that is so smart, because right when you said you opened it to the public, I remember thinking, oh, well, most people would have said this is a great way for members, for non-members to join. But I love that, again, the overarching goal was for everybody to know it and not necessarily to be thinking about a membership piece.
Yes, the education was so critical. It is so critical that we did not want, finances or membership to be a barrier for anyone to access it. And I'd say, that after we launched the resource center, then, we tapped into some of our working group members to collaborate on blogs and some training documents. So these were really popular and they focused on what we thought people could expect from the final guidelines, how to prepare, like that was a big one, and practical information that they needed to know. We also, our subject matter experts created some resources comparing the previous version of the guidelines to the new version and what that meant for them. So really drilling down this huge amount of content into very accessible, practical information that they could digest and know how they were going, or have a sense of how they were going to implement it within their organization.
That's great. So I know it was a success. The engagement numbers were incredible. There were record-breaking webinars, thousands of downloads, high completion rates. But beyond metrics, how did you define success internally for this?
Yeah, I think as a marketer and communication professional, we are in a position to monitor engagement across our channels. So we know like who's talking about us, what they're saying, and what content they're sharing. So, I had the ability to, read these messages and understand what people thought was valuable. We also, would review the webinar chats and analyze, any survey feedback that came to us. So that way we make sure that we understood what their challenges were and where they needed more education. And then, of course, listening to our board members and our working group, and then, having conversations at our conference, just really every chance that we could hear from our community. So, I say when you pay attention to the qualitative and the quantitative data, that provides a broader perspective on where you're successful while also identifying opportunities to go deeper or to improve and pivot.
I love that. I love to hear somebody even say that because it isn't always about the numbers. They're great. It's great to have them and definitely great to see the engagement. But I think what you've talked about just shows the broader range of of what the campaign did, which is great. Now you mentioned pivot. I know there were moments where you had to pivot fast, like opening access when demand exceeded capacity and extending conversations beyond live sessions. Talk to us about that and about the importance of agility to make this campaign work.
Yeah, so I think agility, in addition to staff buy-in and teamwork across departments, was essential. So it was really important for everybody to know what their role was in the campaign. So whether it was membership, marketing, communications, education, the person that was responsible for our AMS and our technology, like we all had a really important role to play, and keeping communication open and accessible through regular check-ins, having a dedicated teams channel that really helped to keep us focused on, okay, this is where we are, and these are our next steps and our priority. But I think when you mentioned us needing to pivot, we had a snafu where our first webinar had 3,000 registrants, which was a record by far for ACRP. And we didn't anticipate that our AMS could not handle the number of people logging in to their account in that short time period. So we realized during the webinar that people were coming on and saying, oh my gosh, it took me 30 minutes to log in. And so I was there, apologizing and thanking people for, being persistent. But it also told us that people tried for a half hour to get into a webinar, which again just shows how much they needed this content. So immediately after that webinar, we had an all hands on meeting and decided that, we needed to get the recording as soon as possible from our vendor. We put it up in the resource center and we just made it open access. So, again, like for our webinars, we typically don't offer them for free to non-members, but we did in this case, and that was what helped lead to 3,000 registrants. And really, I think it's very easy when things are going well to make statements that you want to be this trusted resource. But it's when things don't go well is when you have the opportunity to really prove it. And by pivoting, being responsive, like communicating quickly, and just owning the fact that it didn't go as well as we wanted it to was really important to us. And I think ultimately, while it probably was upsetting to some people that they recognized, that we really did our best to make it up to them. So nobody wants, to have snafus like that when it's so important, but I think it's how you respond that really says a lot more about your commitment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there will always be snafus at all times,
Yes.
and it is really how you respond to them. And I love that again you put it all out there. And I'm still sort of in shock that 3,000 people signed up for a webinar.
So am I.
Yeah, that's amazing. So if another association is facing a major industry shift or a regulatory change, what are the biggest lessons from this campaign, especially for teams without massive budgets or staffs? Do you have any takeaways for that?
Sure. So, just to share, ACRP has a team of 20 on staff, and we did not have a massive budget at all, at least for the marketing side. It really was all organic. So we really, leaned into creativity and just finding ways to make sure that we got the word out. But I think, in terms of top lessons, I would say make sure that your campaign and this effort maps to your strategic plan. Like it should support your organization's goals, and everybody on your team, everybody on your staff should be aware of that. like understanding the why this is so important to your members and your organization. And then communicating with your internal and your external stakeholders early and often. Um, Again, making sure people understand your plan, the why, and how it will be executed. I think planning early is always ideal. We know that it's not always possible, but when you can, plan in advance, that allows you to have the appropriate resources and staff time allocated. And, from a communications perspective, making sure that you have adequate room in your content calendar and it just fits into your overall strategy. And I think, thinking about how you can kind of cross purpose things. So, we had our webinars and then we had sessions at our conference. And when we had this webinar and some people couldn't log in, or we had so many questions, we couldn't get to them all. We decided at that point that we really needed to have a session at our conference to do a live Q&A. So, we made that open access as well. And so really just thought about how can we make sure that we're communicating across all of our different avenues, whether digitally or live, to really make sure everybody's aware of the resources that we have and what we're providing to them. And I think having metrics that define success, checking them regularly. It's great to say these are the metrics, but if you don't check them, then you don't know how you're doing. And then not being afraid to share your wins, like whether that's with your supervisor, with your staff, and even externally by applying for awards such as this. It really is important to help validate the worth of what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think that's also great just advice, and because when people are working really hard and putting all of their effort into something, it really is nice at the very end to be able to hear what the wins are and not just assume that everyone knows that. And I feel like
Right.
that's great advice. So, as you look toward 2026, what are you most excited about for the association? Whether that's building on this momentum or evolving your content strategy or even supporting your community through future changes?
Yeah, right now, the clinical research industry is facing some challenges like funding pressures and regulatory uncertainty, but it's also an opportunity for the industry to evolve and really reimagine how clinical research is conducted. We heard that from our members at our conference last year. It's really embracing the philosophy of doing more with less and really rethinking. So, similar to the pandemic, the clinical research workforce is coming together again to innovate and support one another and really, come out stronger in the end. So, I think, with that challenge, is a lot of opportunity, and also with our anniversary it's just another chance to really reflect on where the industry is, kind of reaffirm what ACRP's role is within the industry, and just really sticking to our mission to be a trusted community for clinical research professionals around the world, and then providing them with the education that they need and certification and training, and really just a place um, to have connections with others in the field. It's really important. So with all that, I think, leading into our community to share their stories of, how ACRP has impacted their career and their professional growth, and, how we can best support them going forward is what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, I think that's great. Now we're going to move on to our rapid fire round. This lets our listeners get to know you, and we wrap up every podcast with this. So, what's one small thing that's bringing you joy lately?
I would say that, well, I don't know if it's small, but I have a son who's almost 17. And so watching him, Navigate like his next steps in life is giving me a lot of joy right
Oh,
now.
that's great. That's
Yeah.
really great. What are you currently obsessed with? Book, show, hobby, idea?
So my husband and I started watching Severance this weekend. So I don't know if I'm quite obsessed yet. I think I'm getting close to it, but that's what I'm really enjoying. And then plants. I'm also really getting more into plants. I find them to be really a good stress reliever, and it just helps me feel cozy.
Yes, I agree. What's your ideal comfort food?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think probably one of the first dishes that comes to mind is shepherd's pie, especially at this time of year.
Yes, especially on a day like today because it's
Yes.
freezing.
Yes.
What's a travel moment that still makes you smile when you think about it?
I would say in 2020, my family, we drove up to Vermont with our American foxhound, and we did a very like B&B, like isolating, like walking in the woods type vacation. And we were up in Stowe, and we took a gondola ride to the top of Stowe Mountain, and we had our hound with us in the gondola, and she hated every moment of it. She just was like a mess. And so I had like a cartoon that was drawn of her in a gondola and just like freaking out. So that's something that always makes me laugh when I think back to that moment.
I love it. Although that sounds like a lovely trip. I could use like some quiet time, I feel like in the woods at
Yes.
lately. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing how ACRP turned this complex regulatory moment into such a powerful learning experience. And to everyone listening, if you're navigating industry change, this episode is definitely proof that thoughtful strategy and collaboration and agility can turn challenges into real leadership moments. So thanks for being here with us.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for today's episode. The Association Insights Podcast, previously known as the Association 100 Podcast, is a production of Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications, where our mission is to make associations and nonprofits the go-to source in their industries through earned media and thought leadership. This podcast is an extension of our newsletter, a bi-monthly collection of best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies delivered straight to your inbox. Have you undertaken a big change at your association? Or do you have some words of wisdom from the trenches of association life? We want to hear from you, and so do our listeners. Drop us a note at info@onwardupward.com. That's info@onwrdupwrd.com. Be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and share with your friends and colleagues. We're available anywhere podcasts are found. Come back next week for more association insights and inspiration. Thanks for tuning in.